last chapter was from whose point of view? It looks like Dustfinger's. Yeah. What? No? Yeah. This was Finoglio. This one was Dustfinger. He was going to find Risa again, and she wasn't there. They were trying to figure out why. What's up with that? They did, in fact, not find out why or what was up with that, by the way. We'll see if they will in this next chapter. Oh, my bad. You guys are, like, way down there. I guess I'll just keep going here until, like, I lay down there or something. Holy shit. Blinded by the light. Blinded by... I don't remember the rest of those words. Basta and Flatnose and Martola was standing beside them. Or, like, behind Dustfinger. He, like, turned around and he was like, oh, shit. There's the bad guys. Didn't even hear y'all come in. I don't understand. And then he's like, alright, but he is quiet. That's why he probably snuck in like a dove. So then... it was like... oh, Martola's like, take him to the church. I'll go and tell Capricorn. And she said, no, Flatnose told Dustfinger, did you know the boss is very angry with your mute girlfriend? Who is Risa, the servant girl whose Dustfinger went to go sneak in there to see. And she wasn't there. So he thought that she probably gave him away. Because the bad guys were back there. Like, they caught him. And he's like, what the fuck? So... it said... for a split second, Dustfinger felt almost happy, so Risa hadn't given him away. All the same, he never should have asked for her help. So that was the end of that chapter. So where's Maggie still? Well, this is Maggie. This chapter's Maggie, so I guess we're about to catch up on what's up with her. So she's still with Finoglio. Farad is with Dustfinger. No, Farad got left at the camp because Dustfinger was like, no, fuck no, you're not coming with me. But Dustfinger, I mean, Farad honestly probably snuck behind him. So he's gonna, like, rescue Dustfinger or something, I bet. Because he's not gonna listen as Farad. Duh. So he's probably, like, slinking behind him somewhere with his Martin. And then freaking, Maggie and Finoglio are locked up in what's-his-fuck's room. Because he thinks he's magic. Okay, yeah, I'm kind of remembering where we are now. Alright, y'all ready? There's your recap. Stick with me to find out what's next. God, I need help. I need a word prompt back there. Whew. We're on chapter 38. This excerpt thingy, foreshadowing paragraph before each chapter. For those of y'all who are new, it comes from like another book or poetry or whatever. This one's from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. Says, she liked his tears so much that she put out her beautiful finger and let them run over it. Her voice was so low that at first he could not make out what she said. Then he made it out. She was saying that she thought she could get well again if children believed in fairies. Oh. That's from Tinkerbell. Okay. Chapter 38, A Quiet Voice. Maggie did try her plan. As soon as it was dark, she hammered on the door with her fist. Finoglio woke with a start, but before he could stop her, Maggie had called to the guard outside the door that she had to go to the toilet. The man who had relieved Flatnose was a short-legged fellow with jug ears who was amusing himself by swatting moths with a rolled-up newspaper. Over a dozen insects were already smeared on the white wall when he let Maggie out into the corridor. "I need to go too," cried Finoglio, perhaps intending to dissuade Maggie from carrying out her plan. But the guard closed the door in his face. "One at a time," he grunted at the old man, "and if you can't wait, you'll just have to pee out of the window." Rude. She's over here snoring. I already put her to sleep. Taking his newspaper with him as he escorted Maggie to the laboratory, he killed 3 more moths and a butterfly that was fluttering helplessly from wall to bare wall. Finally, he pushed a door open, the last door before the staircase to the ground floor. Just a few more steps, thought Maggie. I'm sure I can run downstairs faster than he can. "Maggie, please, you must forget about running away," Finoglio had kept whispering in her ear. "You'll get lost. There's nothing outside but wild country for miles." "Your father would be furious if he knew what you were planning." Oh no, he wouldn't, Maggie had thought, but when she was in the little room, which contained nothing but a sink and a bucket, her courage almost failed her. It was so dark outside, so terribly dark, and it was still a long way to the door of Capricorn's house. "I must try," she whispered to herself before she opened the door. I must. The guard caught up with her on the 5th stair. He carried her back over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. "And next time I'll take you to the boss," he said before pushing her back into the room. "He'll think up a good punishment for you." She cried for almost half an hour while Finoglio sat beside her, staring unhappily into space. "It's all right," he kept murmuring, but nothing was all right. Nothing at all. "We don't even have a light in here," she finally sobbed, "and they've taken my books away." At that, Finoglio reached under his pillow and put a flashlight in her lap. "I found it under my mattress," he whispered. "With a few books, too. Who would have thought someone had hidden them here?" Darius the reader. Maggie could remember how the thin little man had come hurrying up the nave of Capricorn's church with his pile of books. The flashlight must surely be his. And how long had Capricorn kept him prisoner in this bare little room? "There was a blanket in the cupboard as well," whispered Finoglio. "I put it on the top bunk for you." "Can't get up there myself, I'm afraid. When I tried, the whole thing swayed like a ship at sea." "I'd rather sleep in the top bunk anyway," murmured Maggie, rubbing her sleeve over her face. She didn't want to cry anymore. It was no good anyway. Finoglio had put some of Darius's books on the bunk along with the blanket for her. Maggie carefully laid them out side by side. They were almost all books for grown-ups. They were almost all books for grown-ups. A well-worn thriller, a book about snakes, another about Alexander the Great, the Odyssey. The only books for children were a collection of fairy tales and Peter Pan. And she had read Peter Pan at least half a dozen times already. Outside, the guard stuck out his newspaper again, and below her, Finoglio tossed and turned restlessly on the narrow bunk. Why do we even have dumb words like that? Maggie knew she wouldn't be able to sleep, so there was no point in even trying. Once again, she looked at the strange books. Closed doors, all of them. Which should she open? Behind which would she forget all of this? Boston, Capricorn, Inkheart, herself, everything. She put aside the thriller and the book about Alexander the Great, hesitated, and picked up the Odyssey. It was a worn little volume. Darius must have liked it very much. He had even underlined some passages for one of them so hard that his pencil had almost gone through the paper. But hard as he tried, he could not save his friends. Undecidedly, Maggie leafed through the worn pages that closed the book and put it down. No, she knew the story well enough to realize that she was almost as afraid of the Greek heroes as she was of Capricorn's men. She wiped a lingering tear away from her cheek and let her hand hover over the other books. Fairy tales. She wasn't particularly fond of fairy tales, but the book looked attractive. The pages rustled as Maggie browsed through them. They were as thin as tracing paper and covered with tiny print. There were wonderful illustrations of dwarves and fairies, and the stories told tales of mighty beings, tall as giants, strong as bears, even immortal. But they were all malignant. The giants ate human beings, the dwarves were greedy for gold, the fairies were malicious and bore a grudge. No, Meggie turned the light on the last book, Peter Pan. The fairy in that book wasn't very nice either, but at least Meggie knew the world awaiting her between its covers very well. Perhaps it was just a thing for such a dark night. An owl screeched outside, but otherwise all was still in Capricorn's village. Finoglio murmured something in his sleep and began to snore. Meggie snuggled down under the scratchy blanket, took most sweater out of her backpack, and put it under her head. Please, she whispered as she opened the book, please get me out of here for just an hour or so. Please take me far, far away. Outside, the guard muttered something to himself. He was probably bored to death. The floorboards creaked under his tread as he paced up and down outside the locked door. Take me away from here, whispered Meggie. Please take me away from here. She let her fingers run along the lines over the rough, sandy paper while her eyes followed the letters to another colder place, and another time to a house without locked doors and black-jacketed thugs. A moment after the fairy's entrance, the window was blown open. What? Oh, she's reading that. It's like in italics. A moment after the fairy's entrance, the window was blown open, whispered Meggie, hearing the sound of the window creaking as it opened. Blown open by the breathing of the little stars, and Peter dropped in. He had carried Tinker Bell part of the way, and his hand was still messy with the fairy dust. Fairies, thought Meggie. I can see why Dustfinger misses the fairies. No, that was not allowed. She mustn't think of Dustfinger, only of Tinker Bell and Peter Pan, and Wendy lying in her bed, knowing nothing yet of the strange boys who had flown into her room dressed in leaves and cobwebs. Tinker Bell. Oh, she's reading again. I don't know how to let y'all know that, because in here it's just italics, but like, how am I supposed to change my voice to let y'all know? Tinker Bell, he called softly after making sure the children were asleep. Tink, where are you? She was in a jug for the moment and liking it extremely. She had never been in a jug before. What? She liked it. Tinkerbell. Meggie whispered the name twice. She had always liked the sound of it. You clicked your tongue against your teeth, and then there was the soft B sound slipping out of your lips like a kiss. Oh, do come out of that jug and tell me, do you know where they put my shadow? The loveliest tinkle as of golden bells answered him. It is the fairy language. You ordinary children can never hear it. But if you were to hear it, you would know that you had heard it once before. If I could fly like Tinkerbell, thought Meggie, if I could simply climb out the window and fly away, I wouldn't have to worry about the snakes, and I'd find Mo before he gets here. He must have lost the way. Yes, that must be it. But suppose something had happened to him. Meggie shook her head as if to drive away the bad thoughts that had wormed their way into her head yet again. Tink said that the shadow was in the big box, she whispered. She meant the chest of drawers, and Peter jumped at the drawers, scattering their contents to the ground with both hands. Meggie stopped. There was something bright in the room. She switched the flashlight off, but the light was still there. I have hiccups and stuff's getting serious. Oh, what the hell? What the hell? Okay. She switched the flashlight off, but the light was still there. 1,000 times brighter than the night lights, and when it came to rest for a second, whispered Meggie, you saw it was a... She did not speak the word aloud. She just followed the light with her eyes as it flew around the room, very fast, faster than a glowworm and much larger. Finoglio! She couldn't hear any sound from the guard outside the door. Perhaps he'd gone to sleep. Meggie leaned over the side of the bunk until she could touch Finoglio's shoulder. Finoglio, look! She shook him until he finally opened his eyes. Suppose the little creature flew out the window. Meggie slid down from the top bunk and shut the window so quickly that she almost caught one of the shimmering wings in it. The fairy, alarmed, whirred away. Meggie thought she heard an indignant chirrup. Finoglio stared at the shining little creature, his eyes heavy with sleep. What is it? He asked hoarsely. A mutated glowworm? Meggie went back to the bed without taking her eyes off the fairy, who was darting faster and faster around the little room like a lost butterfly. Up to the ceiling, back to the door, over to the window again. She kept returning to the window. Meggie put the book on Finoglio's lap. Peter Pan. He looked at the book, then at the fairy, then at the book again. I didn't mean to do it, whispered Meggie. Really, I didn't. The fairy kept colliding with the window again and again. No, Meggie hurried over to her. You mustn't go out. You don't understand. It was a fairy, no longer than your hand, but still growing. It was a girl called Tinkerbell, exquisitely gowned in a skeleton leaf. That's another little piece from, like, the book. Someone's coming. Finoglio sat up in such a hurry he hit his head on the top bunk. He was right. Out in the corridor, footsteps were approaching. Rapid, firm footsteps. Meggie retreated to the window. What did it mean? It was the middle of the night. Perhaps Mo's arrived, she thought. Mo is here. Although she didn't want to feel glad of it, her heart leaped with joy. Hide her, whispered Finoglio. Quick, hide her. Meggie looked at him, confused. Of course, the fairy. They mustn't find her. Meggie tried to catch Tinkerbell, but the fairy slipped through her fingers and whirred up to the ceiling, where she hovered like a light made of invisible glass. The footsteps were very close now. Call that keeping watch? It was Basta's voice. Meggie heard a hollow groan. He had probably woken the guard with a kick. Unlock that door and get a move on. I don't have forever. Someone put a key in the lock. That's the wrong one, you dozy idiot. Capricorn wants to see the girl, and I'll tell him why he's had to wait so long. Meggie climbed up on her bed. The bunk swayed alarmingly as she stood on it. Tinkerbell, she whispered, please come here. But she reached out her hand, the fairy flew back to the window, and Basta opened the door. Hey, where did that come from? He asked, standing in the doorway. It's years since I've seen one of those fluttery little things. Meggie and Finoglio said nothing. What was there to say? You needn't think you can wriggle out of telling me now. Basta took off his jacket and went slowly over to the window, holding the garment in his left hand. You stand in the doorway in case it gets away from me, he told the guard. And if you let it get past you, I'll slice off your ears. Leave her alone. Meggie slid hastily down from the bed again, but Basta moved faster. He threw his jacket. Tinkerbell's light disappeared, snuffed out like a candle. There was a faint twitching under the jacket as it fell to the floor. Basta picked it up carefully, holding it together like a sack, went over to Meggie and stepped in front of her. Well, sweetheart, let's hear your story, he said in a menacingly quiet voice. Where did that fairy come from? I don't know, uttered Meggie without looking at him. She was just suddenly here. Basta looked at the guard. Ever seen anything like a fairy in these parts? He asked. The guard raised the newspaper, to which a couple of dusty moth wings were still clinging, and slapped the doorframe with it, smiling broadly. No, but if I did, I'd know what to do about it, he said. You're right, those little creatures are troublesome as midges, but they're supposed to bring luck. Basta turned back to Meggie. Now then, out with it. Where did she come from? I'm not asking you again. Meggie couldn't help it. Her eyes stayed to the book that Finoglio had dropped. Basta followed her glance and picked it up. Well, fancy that, he murmured as he looked at the picture on the cover. The artist had produced a good likeness of Tinkerbell. In real life, she was a little paler and a little smaller than the picture suggested, but of course Basta still recognized her. He whispered softly through his teeth, then held the book close to Maggie's face. Don't try telling me the old man read her out of this, he said. You did it. I'll bet my knife you did it. Did your father teach you how, or have you just inherited the knack from him? Well, it comes from the same thing. He stuck the book in his waistband and grasped Maggie's arm. Come along, we're going to tell Capricorn about this. I was really supposed to get you just to meet an old acquaintance, but I'm sure Capricorn will have no objection to hearing such interesting news. Has my father come? Maggie did not resist as he forced her out of the door. Basta shook his head and looked ironically at her. Him? No, he hasn't turned up yet. The sun's moved, thank God. No, he hasn't turned up yet, he said. Obviously, he thinks more of his own skin than yours. I wouldn't be pleased with him if I were you. Maggie felt two emotions at once. I have hiccups again. It's like reading and talking so much. Maggie felt two emotions at once, disappointment as sharp as a prickle, and relief. I'll admit I'm rather disappointed in him, Basta continued. I swore he'd come looking for you, but I guess we don't need him anymore, right? He shook his jacket, and Maggie thought she heard a quiet, desperate tinkling. Lock the old man in, Basta told the guard, and if you're snoring again when I get back, it will be worse for you. Then he hauled Maggie down the corridor. Chapter 39, The Punishment for The fuck? For traitors. I think that was a squirrel. The Punishment for Traitors. The Satanic Mill. That's what this excerpt is from. But I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get a thingy. I don't know what they're called. Also, I'm gonna look outside. Squirrels? Oh, Hall's Breezers. They're good for reading and stuff. They, like, help keep your... I don't want to say what they do, but, like... I don't know. They make your throat not dry. There we go. That's the best way to say it. It's like a cough drop that's not really a cough drop. Can I lay there? Can we come back here? Wow, I just ate that one. Oops. Weird. I'm too short. For my light. Help me. A big old bong in the way. No, my chat. I The dog is too cute. I guess. She's okay. I need to plug in my stuff. Ah! Oh, there we go. It should last probably until we're done, at least. I'm done reading. Oh my god. I know you ain't really expecting me to answer that. Jesus. You wanna come over here? Get comfortable. Okay. This excerpt is from The Satanic Mill, which I don't know what that is, but it's by I don't know how to say his name either, dude. Ottfried Prusler. Where are you going? What about you? Inquired Lobbish. You're not afraid, are you, Crabbit? More than you guess, said Crabbit, and not for myself alone. Maggie's shadow followed her like an evil spirit as she embossed across the square into the outside the church. I need a smaller. I'm having trouble getting comfortable. Maggie's shadow followed her like an evil spirit as she embossed across the square outside the church. The glaring floodlights made the moon look faded. Did y'all hear that? Don't judge me. Oh, it's too big. It sounds like someone's outside, I swear. It's probably just the squirrels, though. It was not so bright inside the church. Capricorn's statue, looking down on them in gloom, was pale and half swallowed up by the shadows. Between the columns, it was as dark as if night had fled there to escape the floodlights. Only the place where Capricorn sat, leaning back in his armchair with a contemptuous expression and wrapped in a silk dressing gown that shimmered like peacock feathers, was illuminated by a single lamp. Their descriptions go on for so long that, like, I lose the subject. The magpie stood behind him, appearing little more than a washed-out face above a black dress in the dim light. A fire was burning in one of the fireplaces at the foot of the steps. The smoke stung Maggie's eyes, and the flickering firelight danced on the red walls and columns as if the whole church were ablaze. Hang the rags outside his children's window as a final warning, Capricorn's voice echoed in Maggie's ears, although he kept it lowered. And soak them with gasoline until it's seeping out, he told Cockerel, who was standing at the foot of the steps with 2 other men. When the smell reaches the fool's nostrils first thing in the morning, perhaps he'll finally realize my patience is at an end. Cockerel received the order with a brief nod, turned on his heel, and signaled to the other two to follow him. Their faces were blackened with soot, and each of the three wore a red rooster's feather in his buttonhole. "Ah, Silvertongue's daughter," growled Cockerel sarcastically as he limped past Maggie. Well, well, hasn't your father come for you yet? Doesn't seem very keen to see you, does he?" The other two laughed, and Maggie couldn't help the hot blood rising to her face. "At last," cried Capricorn, as Basta stepped at the foot of the steps with his prisoner. "What kept you so long?" Something like a smile passed over the magpie's face. She had pushed out her lower lip slightly, giving her thin face a look of great satisfaction, which troubled Maggie much more than Capricorn's mother's usual dark looks. "The guard couldn't find the right key," replied Basta irritably. "And then, well, I had to catch something." The fairy began moving again as he held up his jacket, and its fabric bulged with her... I'm not saying that word again. Frenzied attempts to struggle free. "What's that?" Capricorn's voice sounded impatient. "Have you taken to catching bats these days?" Basta's lips quivered with annoyance, but he bit back his reply, and without a word, put his hand under the black cloth. Suppressing a curse, he produced the fairy. "Devil take these flickery little things," he said angrily. "I'd forgotten how hard they can bite." One of Tinkerbell's wings was fluttering frantically. The other was held between Basta's fingers. Maggie couldn't watch. She was terribly ashamed of herself for luring the fragile little creature out of her book. Capricorn looked at the fairy with an expression of distaste. "Where did that come from, and what kind is it? I never saw one with wings like that before." Basta took Peter Pan out of his waistband and put the book down on the steps. "I think it comes out of here," he said. "Look at the picture on the cover. There are more pictures of her inside, and guess who read her out of it?" He squeezed Tinkerbell so hard that she had gulped silently for air. While he laid his other hand on Maggie's shoulder, she tried to shake off his fingers, but Basta merely tightened his grip. "The girl?" Capricorn sounded incredulous. "Yes, and it seems as though she's as good at it as her father. Look at this fairy." Basta grabbed Tinkerbell's slender legs and dangled her up in the air. "Seems perfectly all right, doesn't she? She can fly and scold and make tingling sounds and all those stupid things those stupid fairies do." God. They write this dumb. It's not me, it's them. "Interesting. Yes, very interesting indeed." Capricorn rose from his chair, tightened the belt of his dressing gown, and came down the steps. He stopped beside the book that Basta had put down on them. "So it runs in the family," he murmured as he bent down to pick it up. Frowning, he looked at the cover. "Peter Pan," he read. "Why, that's one of the books my old reader Darius particularly liked." "Yeah, now I remember. He had once read to me from it. The idea was to lure out one of those pirates, but he failed miserably. He fetched a load of stinking fish and a rusty grappling iron into my bedroom instead. Didn't we punish him by making him eat the fish?" Basta laughed. "Yes, he was even more upset that you had his books taken away. He must have hidden this one." "So he must have." Capricorn went over to Maggie, looking thoughtful. She would have liked to bite his fingers when he put his hand under her chin, turning her face so that she had to look straight into his lifeless eyes. "See how she looks at me, Basta," he remarked mockingly, "just as obstinate as her father always was." "Basta, save that look for him, sweetheart. Or better save that look for him, sweetheart. You're very angry with your father, I'm sure, but I couldn't care less where he is, because from now on I have you, my new wonderfully talented reader. Whereas, well, you must hate him for abandoning you, right? Don't be ashamed of it. Hatred can be very inspiring. I never liked my own father either." Maggie turned her head aside when Capricorn finally let go of her chin. Her face was burning with shame and fury, and she could still feel his fingers as if they left marks on her skin. "Did Basta tell you why he was to bring you here so late at night? To meet someone?" Maggie tried to make her voice sound bold and unafraid, but she didn't succeed. The sobs in her throat would only let a whisper emerge. "That's right." Capricorn gave the magpie a signal. She came down the steps and disappeared into the dark beyond the columns. A little later, there was a creaking sound above Maggie's head, and when she looked up to the roof in alarm, she saw something being lowered from the darkness. A net, no, 2 nets, such as she had seen in fishing boats. They stopped and hung there about 5 meters above the floor, just over Maggie's head, and only then did she see human figures caught in the coarse ropes, like birds entangled in the netting over a fruit tree. Maggie was feeling dizzy just from looking up. What must it be like to be dangling up there, held on only by a few cords? Well, don't you recognize your old friend? Capricorn put up his hands into his dressing gown pockets. Tinkerbell was still held in Bosta's fingers like a broken doll. Her faint tinkling was the only sound to be heard. I keep, like, reading ahead past, like, where I'm reading out loud and then, like, losing my space. This is, like, a recurring habit. No, my chat. Tiny Kirby. Huh? Come on, man. Okay, where was I? Well, don't you recognize your old friend? Capricorn put his hands in his dressing gown pockets. Tinkerbell was still held in Bosta's fingers like a broken doll. Her faint tinkling was the only sound to be heard. Yes, I see you do. There was no mistaking the satisfaction in Capricorn's voice. That's what happens to filthy little traitors who steal keys and set prisoners free. Maggie refused to look at Capricorn. She had eyes only for Dustfinger. Hello, Maggie. You look rather pale, he called down. He was trying very hard to sound light-hearted, but Maggie heard the terror in his voice. She knew what voices meant. I'm supposed to give you love from your father. He'll come for you soon, he says, and he won't come alone. You'll make a teller of fairy tales yet if you carry on like the Fire Eater, Bosta called up. But even the girl here doesn't believe that tale. You'll have to think up something better. Maggie stared up at Dustfinger. She wanted so to believe him. Bosta let go of that poor fairy, he called to his old enemy. Send her up to me. It's far too long since I saw one of those. Oh, I bet you'd like that. No, I'm keeping her for myself, replied Bosta, flicking Tinkerbell's tiny nose with his finger. I've heard that fairies keep bad luck away if you keep them in your house. I'll put her in one of those big glass wine jugs. You were always so keen on fairies. What do they eat? Do I feed her flies or what? Tinkerbell braced her arms against his fingers and tried desperately to free her second wing. She managed it too, but Bosta had a strong grip on her legs, and as hard as she fluttered, she couldn't break free. At last, with a quiet tinkle, she gave up. Her light was hardly any brighter now than a candle flickering out. Do you know why I had the girl brought here, Dustfinger? Called Capricorn up to his prisoner. She was to persuade you to tell us something about her father, where he is, if you really know anything. Which I begin to doubt, but now I don't need the information anymore. Water. Water. I don't need the information anymore. The daughter can take her father's place, and just at the right time, too. For I've decided that we must think up something really special for your punishment. What's your deal? Squirrels are people. Squirrels. Lay down. Yeah, lay down. For I've decided we must think up something really special for your punishment. Something impressive, something memorable. After all, that's only right for a traitor, isn't it? Can you guess what my idea is? No? Then let me give you a clue. In your honor, my new reader will read aloud to us from Inkheart. It's your favorite book, after all. Even though I know you're not very fond of the character, I want her to bring out of it. Her father would have fetched that old friend from me long ago if you hadn't helped him to escape, but now his daughter will do it. Can you guess who it is I mean? Dustfinger laid his scarred cheek against the net. Oh yes, indeed I can. How could I ever forget him? He said so quietly that Maggie could hardly make out the words. Why are you talking only about the fire eater's punishment? The magpie had appeared between the columns again. Have you forgotten our little mute pigeon, Risa? Her treachery was at least as bad as his. She looked up at the second net with a disdainful expression. Yes, to be sure, there was something almost like regret in Capricorn's voice. What a waste, but there was nothing else for it. Maggie couldn't see the face of the woman dangling in the second net just beyond Dustfinger. She saw only the dark blonde hair, a blue dress, and slender hands clinging to the ropes. Capricorn sighed heavily. It really is a shame, he said, turning to Dustfinger. Why did you have to pick on her, of all people? Couldn't you have just persuaded one of the others to go nosing around for you? I really have had a weakness for her ever since that useless Darius read her out of the book for me. It never bothered me that she lost her voice in the process. No, far from it. I stupidly assumed that he meant I could trust her more. Did you know that her hair used to look like spun gold? Yes, I remember that, said Dustfinger hoarsely, but in your presence it's turned darker. Nonsense, Capricorn frowned with annoyance. Maybe we should try fairy dust. Sprinkled with a little fairy dust, they say even brass will look like gold. Perhaps it works on a woman's hair as well. Hardly worth the trouble, said the magpie mockingly, unless you want her to look particularly beautiful for her execution. Oh, never mind. Capricorn turned abruptly and went back to the steps. Maggie hardly noticed. She was looking up at the strange woman. Capricorn's words were working away feverishly in her mind. Hair spun like gold. That useless reader Darius. No, it couldn't be true. She stared up, narrowing her eyes to see the face better through the ropes, but it was hidden in dark shadows. Good. Capricorn dropped into his chair again with another heavy sigh. How long will we need for the preparations? It should all be done properly, I think. 2 days. The magpie climbed the steps and took up her position behind him. If you want to summon the men from the other bases, that is. Capricorn frowned. Yes, why not? It's time to show everyone a little example. Discipline has left much to be desired recently. He looked at Basta as he said this, and Basta bowed his head as if all the misdemeanors of the last few days weighed heavily on him. The day after tomorrow, then, Capricorn went on, when darkness falls, I want Darius to carry out another experiment with the girl first. Get her to read something out of a book, anything. I just want to make sure that the fairy didn't turn up by pure chance. Basta had wrapped Tinkerbell up in his jacket again. Maggie wanted to put her hands over her ears so as not to hear the feeble tinkling sounds the fairy was making. She pressed her lips together to stop them from trembling and looked up at Capricorn. But I won't read aloud for you, she said. Her voice rang out through the church at twice its usual volume. Not a word. I won't read you out any treasure, and I certainly won't read out some kind of executioner. She spat out the word into Capricorn's face, but Capricorn only toyed with the belt of his dressing gown. Looking bored. Oh, that's like the end of the sentence. Take her away, he told Basta. It's late. The child must get some sleep. Basta prodded Maggie in the back. You heard. Go on, get moving. Maggie looked up at Dustfinger one last time, then walked uncertainly down the nave ahead of Basta. When she passed below the second net, she looked up again. The unknown woman's face was still hidden, but she thought she could make out her eyes, and a slender nose, and if she imagined the hair somewhat lighter in color. Go on, I said, snapped Basta. Maggie obeyed, but she kept looking back. I won't do it, she cried when she almost reached the church porch. I swear, I won't read anyone here, ever. Oh, don't swear oaths you can't keep, whispered Basta as he pushed the door open and let her out into the brightly Floodlit Square. That's the end of the chapter. Anybody know how long we've read? Should we do one more chapter? 2, 3. Farid. It's gonna be so long before the whole group is back together again. Like, I just keep thinking they're so close, and then they're not. Like, are they not gonna be together till the end? I want to read ahead. No. Okay, how long is this chapter? Because we only read 2. We should at least read like 3. Let me go see how many pages we read. That's what I like to go by. 359. 2. 376. 377. It's like me with the wheel of time. It's like, I want to know already. Like, why is the whole group separate? We've only read 18 pages, but like, it's like 2-3 minutes a page. So if I double that, we're at like 40-ish minutes. Favorite characters. Oh my god, that sucks. I hate that shit. So we'll do like one more chapter. Ugh. We could totally have been reading outside. I just kind of forgot. But yeah, we could have been reading outside this whole time. You guys ready? Chapter 40, The Black Horse of the Night. This excerpt is from Roald Dahl's The BFG. He bent down and lifted Sophie from his pocket. She was still in her nightie and her feet were bare. She shivered and stared around her in the swirling mists and ghostly vapors. Where are we? She asked. We is in dream country. The BFG said, this is where all dreams is beginning. Fuck, it's hard to not read like the right words, whatever the wrong words are used in the sentence. No, it's like 60 degrees for the next few days. And then it's gonna get into the, like it's gonna snow for a couple days after that. It's gonna be like a whole lot of snow is gonna hit. Just how it always is. We'll get a couple nice days and then a whole bunch of bad ones come. It always hits about 60 degrees before it snows. Okay, Finoglio was lying on his bed when Basta pushed Meggie in through the door. What have you done to her? He demanded of Basta, swiftly getting to his feet. She's as white as a sheet. But Basta had already closed the door behind him. You'll be relieved in 2 hours, Meggie heard him tell the guard. Then he was gone. Finoglio put his hands on Meggie's shoulders and looked into her face with concern. Come on, tell me, what did they want you for? Is your father here? Meggie shook her head. They've caught Dustfinger, she said. And a woman. What woman? Heavens, what a state you're in. Finoglio drew her over to the bed, and Meggie sat down beside him. I think she's my mother, she whispered. Your mother? Finoglio looked at her in astonishment. His eyes were bloodshot from his sleepless night. Distractedly, Meggie smoothed down her skirt, and it was dirty and crumpled. No wonder, she'd been sleeping in it for days. Her hair's darker now, she stammered. And of course Mo's photo of her is 9 years old. Capricorn has her in a net, and Dustfinger too. He's going to have them both executed in 2 days' time, and I'm supposed to read someone out of Inkheart to do it. That friend, as Capricorn calls him, I told you. Mo was supposed to be going to do it. You wouldn't tell me who the friend was, but now you must. She looked pleadingly at Finoglio. The old man closed his eyes. Merciful heaven, he murmured. Outside it was still dark. The moon hung in the sky in front of their window, with a cloud drifting past it like a tattered dress. I'll tell you tomorrow, said Finoglio. That's a promise. No, tell me now. He looked at her thoughtfully. It's not a story for this hour of the night. You'll have had bad dreams afterwards. Tell me, Meggie repeated. Finoglio sighed. Oh dear, I know that look from my grandchildren, he said. Very well then. He helped her up to her bunk, put Mo's sweater under her head, and pulled the blanket up to her chin. I'll tell it to you the way I wrote it in Inkheart, he said quietly. I know that passage almost by heart. I was very proud of it at the time. He cleared his throat before he began, whispering the words into the night. But one was being feared. What? But one being was feared even more than Capricorn's men. He was known as the Shadow, and he appeared only when Capricorn called him. Sometimes he was red as fire, sometimes as gray as the ashes into which fire turns all that it devours. He leaped from the ground like flame flickering up from wood. His touch and even his breath brought death. He rose up at his master's feet, soundless and faceless, scenting the air like a dog on the trail, waiting to be shown his victim. Finoglio swept a hand over his forehead and looked at the window. It was some time before he went on, as if he were recalling the words to mind from long ago. They say, he continued at last, that Capricorn had the shadow made from his victim's ashes by a troll, or the dwarves, who know all that fire and smoke can do. No one was certain, for it was said that Capricorn had those who brought the shadow to life killed afterward. But everyone knew one thing. The shadow was immortal and invulnerable and as pitiless as his master. Finoglio fell silent, and Meggie, her heart beating fast, gazed out at the night. Yes, Meggie, Finoglio said at last in a low voice. I think Capricorn wants you to bring him the shadow. And God have mercy on us if you succeed. There are many monsters in this world, most of them human and all of them mortal. I wouldn't like to have an immortal monster on my conscience. A monster spreading fear and terror here for all time. Your father had an idea when he came to see me. I've already mentioned it to you, and it may be our only chance, but I just don't know how it will work yet. I must think hard. We don't have much time, and you ought to get some sleep now. When did you say this is to happen? The day after tomorrow? Meggie nodded. As soon as dusk falls, she whispered. Finoglio passed a weary hand over his face. Don't worry about the woman, he said. You may not want to hear this, but I don't think she can possibly be your mother. Much as you possibly wish you were. How could she have come here? It was Darius. Meggie buried her face in Mo's sweater. The stupid man who can't read aloud well enough. Capricorn said so. He read her back out of Inkheart, and she lost her voice coming out of the book. She's back, I'm sure she is, and Mo doesn't know. He thinks she's still stuck in the story. Well, if you're right, then I wish she really were still there, muttered Finoglio, pulling the blanket up over her shoulders again with a sigh. I still think you're wrong, but believe what you like, and now go to sleep. But of course, Meggie couldn't sleep. She lay there with her face to the wall, listening to her own heart. Worry and joy mingled there like two colors running into each other. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the nets and the two faces there among the cords. Dustfingers and the other face, blurred as an old photograph. Hard as she tried to see it more clearly, it always faded again. Dawn was breaking outside by the time she finally fell asleep, but the nightmares hadn't finished with her yet. They grew especially fast in the gray time between night and day, spitting an eternity out of seconds. One-eyed ogres, giant spiders stole into Meggie's sleep, hounds of hell who ate children, and all the bugbears she had ever met in stories. They crept out of the box that Mo had made her and jumped from the pages of her favorite books. Even the monsters came out of the picture books that Mo had given her before she knew the alphabet. They danced through Meggie's dream, brightly colored and shaggy, their wide mouths smiling, baring their pointed little teeth. There was the Cheshire cat she had always been so afraid of, and here came the wild things that Mo liked so much. He had hung a picture of them in his workshop. How huge their teeth were. Dustfinger would be crunched between those fangs like a cracker. But just as one of them was stretching out his claws, the one with eyes as big as saucers, a new figure came out of the gray void, hissing like a flame, and ashen gray and faceless, seized the wild thing, and tore it into scraps of paper. Meggie! The monsters vanished, and the sun was shining on Maggie's face. Finoglio was standing beside her bed. You were dreaming. Meggie sat up. The old man's face looked as if he hadn't closed his eyes all night, and he had several new wrinkles. Where's my father, Finoglio? She asked. Why hasn't he come? Whew. Okay, I think we're done for now. Wilma. Oh, that's funny. I think we're finished for now.